Welcome to my channel Grand House. The Empire State Building stands today as a global icon of ambition, a 102-story testament to human ingenuity that defined the New York City skyline for nearly a century. But beneath the gleaming limestone facade and the shimmering Art Deco spire lies a darker, more visceral history. To understand the insane and scary reality of this building, one must look back to the year 1930. The Great Depression had gripped the world, and men were desperate. This desperation fueled the most rapid and dangerous construction project in human history. This is the story of the Sky Boys, the ironworkers who danced with death 1,000 feet above the pavement without a single safety net. When the project began, the goal was simple yet terrifying. Build the world's tallest building in record time. The pace was frantic. At the height of construction, the framework rose at a rate of 4.5 stories per week. To achieve this, over 3,400 workers were employed daily. These were men who had lost everything in the economic crash and were willing to risk their lives for a few dollars a day. The environment was a nightmare of noise, wind, and height. Imagine standing on a steel beam only a few inches wide, the wind whipping off the Atlantic Ocean at 60 miles per hour, while the city of New York looks like a collection of tiny toys beneath your boots. There were no safety harnesses. There were no hard hats. There were no guardrails. These men, mostly Mohawk ironworkers and European immigrants, relied solely on their balance and the steady hands of their partners. This lack of safety wasn't just an oversight. It was a standard of the era and created a chilling atmosphere where one wrong step meant an inevitable, whistling descent into the concrete below. If you look at the official records provided by the developers at the time, the death toll for construction of the Empire State Building is listed as 5 men. According to official data, 1 worker was struck by a truck, another fell down an elevator shaft, 1 was hit by a hoist, and 2 fell from a high steel. On paper, for a project of this magnitude, 5 deaths seemed like a miracle. However, many historians and urban legend enthusiasts argue that this number is a sanitized version of the truth. During the 1930s, record-keeping for immigrant laborers was notoriously poor. Rumors have persisted for decades that the actual number of fatalities was significantly higher, with some estimates suggesting dozens of men lost their lives. The fear among the workers was palpable. It was said that the sound of falling tool, a wrench, or a rivet would cause a momentary silence across the entire site, as every man held his breath to see if a human body would follow the steel. The scary reality is that the building was erected so fast that the safety of the individual was often sacrificed for the speed of the machine. What kind of man agrees to work in such conditions? The Mohawk Skywalkers became legendary for their lack of fear regarding heights. But even for them, the Empire State Building was a different beast. The roughnecks, the men who riveted the steel, worked in teams of 4. The heater would roast a steel rivet until it was glowing cherry red, then toss it 70 feet to the air to the catcher, who would snag out of the sky with a tin can. The bucker would hold the rivet in place while the rifleman hammered it home with a pneumatic gun. This dance happened on narrow beams with nothing but air on either side. The psychological toll was immense. Men spoke of the call of the abyss, a dizzying urge to simply let go. To combat the fear, workers often developed a gallows humor, joking about who would be the next to take the shortcut to the street. This wasn't just bravado. It was a necessary shield against the reality that they were working in a vertical graveyard. Every rivet driven into the 57,000 tons of steel was a reminder that the building was being fueled by the physical and mental exhaustion of men who were one stumble away from becoming a headline. Even today, maintenance workers and overnight security guards in the building's lower levels and basement substructures report strange sensations. There are stories of cold spots and the sound of heavy boots walking on steel where no one is present. Many believe these are the echoes of the men who built the foundation, the ones who labored in the dark, cramped spaces beneath the street level before the spire even touched the clouds. The scary fact is that the Empire State Building was built in just 410 days. That speed came at a cost that cannot be measured in dollars. It was a project born of a win-at-all-cost mentality. When you stand at the base of the building and look up, you aren't just looking at stone and steel. You are looking at a monument to a time when human life was often secondary to the ambition of reaching the sky. The Sky Boys gave the building its soul, but some say they never truly left the heights they helped conquer. While the names of the official 5 victims are often forgotten, their deaths set a grim tone for the building's future. The first recorded death was a sign of things to come, a man crushed by a truck delivering materials. It was a mundane death for such a grand project, but it proved that the site was cursed by its own scale. As the building grew taller, the deaths became more spectacular and terrifying. The fall from the high steel isn't an instant death. It is a several-second journey of realization. This terrifying thought haunted the Sky Boys every morning as they ascended the hoist to the 80th, 90th, and 100th floors. The Empire State Building is beautiful, yes. It is a masterpiece, undeniably. But part 1 of its history teaches us that every great icon has a foundation built on risk, fear, and the very real possibility of a violent end. The scary fact isn't just that people died. It's that thousands of men went to work every day knowing they might be next, all for the sake of the skyline. On the morning of July 28, 1945, the residents of Manhattan were accustomed to the sights and sounds of a world at war, but they never expected the battlefield to come to 34th Street. At 9:40 a.m., a terrifying roar echoed to the fog-shrouded canyons of Midtown. 8B, 25 Mitchell bomber, lost in a thick pea-soup fog, slammed into the north side of the Empire State Building at 200 miles per hour. This wasn't just an accident. It was a localized apocalypse that turned the world's tallest building into a towering furnace. The pilot was Lieutenant Colonel William Franklin Smith, Jr., a decorated war veteran who had flown numerous combat missions over Germany. He was a man of immense skill, yet on this Saturday morning, he made a fatal navigational error. Coming from Bedford Army Airfield in Massachusetts, Smith was warned by air traffic control at Newark Airport that visibility was 0. They advised him to land, but Smith, confident in his abilities, requested permission to continue to LaGuardia. As he cleared the Chrysler Building, he became disoriented by the shifting fog banks. Witnesses on the ground recalled the terrifying sight of the twin-engine bomber weaving between skyscrapers like a panicked bird. Instead of turning left as instructed, Smith turned right. Directly in his path sat the limestone monolith of the Empire State Building. For a split second, the fog parted, revealing the massive wall of the 79th floor. Smith gunned the engines to climb, but it was too late. The 15-ton bomber tore a hole 18 feet wide and 20 feet high directly into the building's ribs. The impact was cataclysmic. One engine tore through the building, exited the opposite side, and crashed through the roof of a penthouse on the next block, starting a fire that destroyed a sculptor's studio. The other engine and part of the landing gear plummeted down an elevator shaft. But the real horror was the fuel. The B-25's tanks were full of high-octane aviation gasoline. Upon impact, the fuel tanks exploded, sending a river of fire cascading down the hallways and stairwells of the 78th and 79th floors. In an instant, the National Catholic Welfare Conference offices became a death trap. Employees, mostly young women, were at their desks when the walls simply vanished in a flash of orange flame. Some were incinerated instantly. Others were forced to make a choice that echoes the horrors of later tragedies: face the fire or the window. The heat was so intense that the steel girders began to glow red, and the limestone exterior cracked like glass. The scene outside was equally surreal. Pedestrians on the sidewalk below were pelted with metal rain, pieces of the airplane, and shards of glass falling from nearly 1,000 feet up. Because of the heavy fog, many people didn't even realize a plane had hit the building. They thought a Japanese kamikaze or a secret German weapon had finally reached New York. Inside the building, the heroics were bone-chilling. Stanley Peskoska, an elevator operator, described the sensation as if the entire world had tilted on its axis. The building shuddered so violently that people on the lower floors were thrown from their chairs. On the 79th floor, survivors crawled through thick, oily black smoke, feeling their way along the walls as the oxygen was sucked out of rooms by the raging inferno. 14 people lost their lives that day, the 3 men on the plane and 11 office workers. Their bodies were so badly burned that identification took days, a grim reminder of the building's vulnerability. The most insane fact about this disaster isn't just the crash itself, but that the Empire State Building survived it all. Most buildings would have collapsed under the structural trauma and the intense heat of a jet fuel fire. However, the Sky Boys of the 1930s had over-engineered the skyscraper to such a degree that it absorbed the blow. While the fire raged on the 79th floor, the rest of the building remained operational. Incredibly, the fires were extinguished in just 40 minutes, a record for a high-rise fire that magnitude. Even more shocking is that the building opened for business on many floors the very next Monday. But for those who walked the halls of the 79th floor after the repairs, the atmosphere had changed. The smell of burnt fuel and ozone supposedly lingered for months, and even today, some claim that the temperature in certain corners of that floor drops inexplicably, as if the ghosts of 1945 are still trying to escape the flames. The 1945 bomber crash changed the way the world looked at skyscrapers. It was no longer just a building. It was a target, both for accidents and for the elements. It proved that even at the height of human achievement, a simple human error and a bank of fog could turn a masterpiece into a tomb. This event remains one of the scariest moments in the building's history because it pierced the illusion of safety that the Cathedral of the Skies provided. It showed that even at 1,000 feet in the air, you are never truly out of reach of tragedy. If the B-25 bomber crash in 1945 was a tale of fire and destruction, the story of Betty Lou Oliver is a tale of pure, concentrated terror. It is perhaps the most insane survival story in the history of New York City, a record-breaking event that sits uncomfortably between a medical miracle and a waking nightmare. While 14 people lost their lives in the 1945 crash, one woman was destined to survive a mechanical failure that should have legally and physically ended her life. This is a story of the longest elevator fall ever survived by a human being, a 75-story plummet into the dark bowels of the Empire State Building. Betty Lou Oliver was a 20-year-old elevator operator. In 1945, the elevators of the Empire State Building were not the automated, computer-controlled machines we use today. They were manually operated by young women in uniform who stood for hours, opening and closing the heavy brass doors for tourists and office workers. On the morning of July 28th, Betty Lou was working her shift, unaware that a twin-engine bomber was currently hurtling through the fog toward the very floor where she stood. When the B-25 Mitchell slammed into the 79th floor, the building buckled. Betty Lou was thrown from her feet as the impact sent a shock wave through the elevator shafts. Severely burned by the initial flash of aviation fuel that poured down the shaft, she was rescued by first aid workers who reached her on the 80th floor. In a state of shock and pain, they did what they thought was best. They placed her in a different elevator to send her down to ground floor for emergency medical treatment. They had no idea that the plane's engine had severed the cables of that very elevator. As soon as the doors closed and the elevator began its descent, the unthinkable happened. The cables, weakened by the impact and the heat of the fire, snapped with a sound like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, there was a sickening moment of weightlessness. Then gravity took over. Betty Lou Oliver was trapped in a small metal box, plunging through total darkness. She wasn't just falling a few stories. She was at the 75th floor. The elevator began to accelerate toward the basement at a terminal velocity that should have crushed every bone in her body upon impact. Witnesses in the lobby and basement reported hearing a whistling sound, the air being pushed out of the shaft by the falling cab, followed by a sound described as a small explosion. The elevator hit the sub-basement with such force that it bypassed the floor and smashed into the hydraulic buffers at the very bottom of the pit. When rescuers rushed to the wreckage, they expected to find a scene of absolute carnage. Instead, they found Betty Lou Oliver alive, though she was badly broken and buried in a pile of twisted metal and severed cables. How did she survive a 75-story freefall? Scientists and engineers have analyzed this scary miracle for decades. There were two primary factors: the air piston effect. Because the elevator shaft was relatively airtight, the falling cab acted like a piston in a cylinder. As it dropped, it compressed the air beneath it, creating a cushion of high-pressure air that slowed the descent just enough to prevent a total terminal velocity impact. The cable coils, hundreds of feet of heavy steel cable, had snapped and fallen to the bottom of the shaft ahead of the elevator. These cables coiled up like a giant metallic spring. When the elevator cab finally hit the bottom, it landed on this bed of steel cushioning, which absorbed the most lethal part of the kinetic energy. Despite surviving, Betty Lou's injuries were horrific. She suffered a broken back, a broken neck, and shattered legs. The psychological horror of those few seconds of falling to the dark is something that can barely be imagined. It is the ultimate nightmare. Being trapped in a small, dark space, knowing with absolute certainty that you are about to die, and having nothing to do but wait for the impact. Betty Lou spent months in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries to piece her body back together. Incredibly, she eventually returned to the Empire State Building, though she never operated an elevator again. Her survival remains in the Guinness World Records to this day, but it serves as a haunting reminder of the building's sheer verticality. The Empire State Building is so tall that even its internal mechanisms can become instruments of terrifying physics. To this day, there are those who claim that the elevator shafts of the Empire State Building carry a strange energy. Technicians working in the pits during the late-night hours have reported hearing the whistling of air and the phantom sound of snapping cables, even when all cars are stationary. Some say the trauma of Betty Lou's fall and the deaths of others in those shafts over the years has left a permanent scar on the building's infrastructure. The story of the 75-story fall is a cornerstone of the building's darker lore. It proves that within this Art Deco masterpiece, the laws of nature are pushed to their absolute limits. It is a story of a miracle, yes, but it is a miracle born from a moment of pure, unadulterated terror that few humans have ever experienced and lived to tell the tale. Of all the dark stories etched into the limestone of the Empire State Building, none is more haunting, more visually arresting, or more tragic than the story of Evelyn McHale. It is a story that transformed a moment of private despair into an eternal public spectacle. On May 1st, 1947, a 23-year-old bookkeeper leaped from the 86th floor observation deck, and her landing became the subject of what Life magazine famously called the most beautiful suicide. This event is perhaps the most insane fact about the building's history, because it blurs the line between a horrific tragedy and a piece of high art photography. Evelyn McHale appeared to the world as a normal, happy young woman. She was engaged to be married to an ex-GI named Barry Rhodes and had just visited him in Pennsylvania for his 24th birthday. By all accounts, the visit was pleasant. Barry later told reporters that when he kissed her goodbye, she seemed as happy as any girl about to be married. However, something was fracturing inside Evelyn. After leaving her fiancé, she traveled back to New York City and checked into the Governor Clinton Hotel. There, she penned a suicide note that revealed a soul in deep, quiet agony. She wrote, "I don't want anyone in or out of my family to see any part of me. Could you destroy my body by cremation? I beg of you and my family, don't have any service for me or remembrance for me. My fiancé asked me to marry him in June. I don't think I would make a good wife for anyone." These words, left on a hotel desk, were the final precursors to a journey that would end 1,050 feet in the air. Evelyn walked to the Empire State Building, purchased a ticket for the observation deck, and ascended to the 86th floor. It was a clear spring day. She took off her coat and folded it neatly over the railing. Beside it, she placed her small tan makeup kit and her pocketbook containing the suicide note. At approximately 10:40 a.m., Evelyn McHale stepped over the guardrail. At that height, the fall takes nearly 10 seconds. Witnesses on the street didn't see her jump, but they heard the impact, a sound described as a cannon shot that echoed through the canyons of 34th Street. But what happened next is what cemented this event in the annals of the macabre. Usually, a fall from over 1,000 feet onto a hard surface results in a scene of unspeakable carnage. The human body simply cannot withstand the physics of such an impact. But Evelyn McHale landed on the roof of a United Nations assembly limousine parked at the curb. Just 4 minutes after her death, a photography student named Robert Wiles happened to be passing by. He snapped a photo that would go on to haunt the world. In the photograph, Evelyn looks as though she is peacefully sleeping. Her legs are crossed at the ankles. Her gloved hand is clutching her pearl necklace. Her face is calm, almost serene, despite the fact that the steel roof of the limousine has crumpled like paper beneath her, wrapping around her body like a metallic shroud. The image is terrifying because of its beauty. It hides the internal destruction, the shattered bones and ruptured organs, behind a mask of Art Deco elegance. It turned a gruesome death into a morbid fashion statement, and it remains one of the most famous photographs ever taken at the site of the Empire State Building. The death of Evelyn McHale highlighted a terrifying reality for the building's management. The Empire State Building had become a magnet for the desperate. There is a psychological phenomenon where iconic tall structures attract those looking to end their lives, drawn by the grandeur of the location. The scary fact here is that Evelyn was not the first, nor would she be the last. In the 3 weeks following her death, 5 more people attempted to jump from the building. The management was forced to acknowledge that their masterpiece was being used as a platform for public tragedy. This led to the installation of the suicide fence, a heavy, curved steel cage that still surrounds the 86th floor deck today. This cage is a physical scar on the building's design, a permanent reminder that the view from the top is so overwhelming that for some, it becomes an invitation to the abyss. To this day, tourists on the 86th floor occasionally report seeing a young woman dressed in 1940s-style clothing, a gray coat and a small hat, standing near the railing. Witnesses say she looks distressed, her eyes fixed on the horizon, but when they approach her to ask if she's all right, she simply vanishes into the crowd or seems to step through the safety fence. The story of Evelyn McHale is insane because it contradicts everything we know about violence and death. It suggests that even in the most horrific circumstances, the Empire State Building lends a certain cold, architectural dignity to its victims. But beneath the beautiful image lies the reality of a young woman who wanted to be forgotten and instead became the immortal face of the building's darkest hour. Her request for no remembrance was ignored by history, and her spirit, along with the crumpled steel of that limousine, is forever welded to the legend of the skyscraper. While many ghost stories are born from vague rumors and campfire tales, the red ghost of the Empire State Building is a phenomenon backed by decades of consistent sightings from tourists, security guards, and even skeptical skeptics. As we move deeper into the building's dark history, we transition from documented physical tragedies to the chilling metaphysical residues left behind. On the 86th floor observation deck, the same deck that saw the leap of Evelyn McHale and dozens of others, there's a recurring vision that has frozen the blood of many visitors. A woman in 1940s attire, often wearing a vibrant red coat or a distinctive red scarf, who appears to be reliving the final moments of a life lost to the abyss. The sightings usually follow a specific, bone-chilling pattern. It typically happens during the golden hour of sunset or on nights when a thick, low-hanging fog rolls in from the Hudson River, wrapping the top of the building in a damp, gray shroud. Witnesses report seeing a woman standing alone at the edge of the north-facing railing. She is described as being exceptionally beautiful but profoundly sad, dressed in high-fashion 1940s clothing, a tailored coat, a small hat with veil, and bright red lipstick that matches her garment. What makes these accounts insane is the consistency of her behavior. She doesn't interact with the crowds. She doesn't look at the view. Instead, she stares intently at the floor or fumbles with a small, vintage handbag. When concerned tourists approach her, thinking she might be a historical reenactor or someone in genuine emotional distress, she performs an act that defies the laws of physics. She is seen to effortlessly step through the heavy iron suicide fence, the very cage installed in 1947 to prevent jumps, and vanish into thin air over the 1,000-foot drop. Who is she? While her identity has never been officially confirmed, paranormal investigators and local historians often link her to a tragic figure from the building's suicide wave of the late 1940s. Some believe she is a woman who jumped shortly after Evelyn McHale, her spirit forever trapped in a loop of her final, desperate decision. Others suggest she is an echo of the many women who lost their fiancés in World War II and came to the world's tallest building to be closer to heaven before joining them. The color red is significant in paranormal lore. It is often associated with intense emotion, trauma, and a refusal to move on. In the context of the Empire State Building, the red ghost serves as a vivid, terrifying reminder that the limestone and steel of this skyscraper have absorbed more than just wind and rain. They have absorbed the raw, vibrating energy of human despair. The fact that she is seen wearing 1940s clothing suggests that her soul is anchored to the era when the building was at its most lethal. The most credible accounts of the red ghost come from the men and women who patrol the building after the tourists have gone home. Security guards working the graveyard shift have reported hearing the clicking of high heels on the observation deck stone floor at 3 a.m. When they check the security cameras, the deck appears empty. However, when they step out into night air, they often report a sudden, localized drop in temperature and the faint scent of 1940s era floral perfume, lilacs or roses, lingering near the north railing. One particularly terrifying account from the 1990s involves a guard who claimed he saw a woman sitting on a ledge outside the safety fence. Thinking it was a jumper, he rushed toward her, calling for backup on his radio. As he reached out to grab her arm, his hand passed through a freezing mist, and the woman dissolved into a flurry of red light. He was so shaken by the encounter that he resigned the following day. These stories are not just scary. They are a part of the building's operational reality, a hidden layer of the job that isn't mentioned in the employee handbook. Why does the 86th floor specifically hold so much ghostly activity? Psychologists suggest that the height and the intense electrical energy of the building, which acts as a massive lightning rod, might create a stone tape effect. This theory posits that minerals in the limestone and the massive steel frame can record high-tension emotional events and replay them under certain atmospheric conditions. The scary fact is that the Empire State Building is a giant conductor. Between the static electricity generated by the wind and the frequent lightning strikes, the building is constantly charged. To a believer in the paranormal, this makes the skyscraper a massive battery, capable of powering these hauntings for eternity. The Red Ghost isn't just a ghost. She is a recorded moment of human tragedy, played back by the very architecture that facilitated her end. As you stand on the 86th floor today, surrounded by selfie-taking tourists and bright lights, it's easy to forget the darkness. But for those who know the history, every flash of red in the corner of their eye or every unexplained chill in the wind brings a legend back to life. The Red Ghost has become as much a part of the Empire State Building as the spire itself. She represents the insane reality that while we build upward to touch the stars, we often leave behind the shadows of those who couldn't handle the height. She is a silent sentinel of the 86th floor, a reminder that some wounds in the fabric of New York City never truly heal. While many of the Empire State Building's scary facts involve human tragedy or ghostly apparitions, there's a natural phenomenon that turns this Art Deco masterpiece into a literal theater of cosmic violence. To look at the building is to see a symbol of stability, but to be at its summit during a storm is to witness the terrifying power of the heavens. The Empire State Building is not just a skyscraper. It is the world's most prominent lightning rod. According to real-world meteorological data, the building is struck by lightning an average of 25 to 100 times every single year. This is not just a scientific curiosity. It is a violent, high-voltage reality that turns the upper reaches of the tower into a danger zone of electrical screams and blinding light. When the Empire State Building was completed in 1931, it immediately became the tallest man-made structure on Earth. By reaching 1,454 feet into the atmosphere, including the spire, it effectively shortened the distance between the Earth and the clouds. In the physics of a thunderstorm, electricity seeks the path of least resistance to ground itself. The building's massive steel frame, totaling some 60,000 tons of riveted girders, acts as a perfect conductor. The scary fact is that the building doesn't just receive lightning. It often initiates it. Because of its extreme height and the sharp point of its antenna, the building can trigger upward leaders. This is a phenomenon where the electrical charge from the building reaches up to meet the clouds, creating a massive bolt that travels from the ground toward the sky. When you stand on the observation deck during a developing storm, you are standing at the center of a massive electrical circuit that is literally pulling fire from the heavens. For the technicians and security personnel who have been caught on the upper levels during a direct hit, the experience is described as nothing short of traumatic. A lightning strike on a typical house is a disaster. A strike on the Empire State Building is a controlled explosion. The sound is not the distant rumble of thunder that people hear on the street. Instead, it is a crack so sharp and loud that it feels like a physical blow to the chest. One maintenance worker described the sensation of a direct strike on the 102nd floor as the sound of 1,000 glass bottles shattering simultaneously in your ears. The air itself becomes ionized, smelling strongly of ozone, a sharp, metallic scent that signals the air has been cooked by thousands of degrees of heat. The flash is so bright that even with eyes closed, the nervous system registers a blinding white light that can cause temporary flash blindness. Before a strike even occurs, the building often begins to exhibit terrifying precursors. On humid, stormy nights, visitors and workers have reported seeing a faint, ghostly blue glow emanating from the tips of the antenna and the corners of the observation deck railings. This is known as St. Elmo's fire, a plasma discharge that occurs when the electrical field around the building becomes incredibly high. While it looks like something out of a horror movie, it is a very real warning from nature. In the 1930s and 40s, before modern grounding systems were perfected, tourists on the 86th floor would sometimes see sparks jumping between their fingertips or feel their hair standing perfectly on end. This static kiss was a favorite trick for young couples to show off, but it was also a sign that they were standing on a giant electrical fuse that was seconds away from being blown. The insane reality is that people were essentially playing with the power of a small power plant while sightseeing. The sheer amount of energy that passes through the building's skeleton during a strike is enough to power a small town for a brief moment. However, the energy is dissipated through the steel frame and into the bedrock of Manhattan. While the building is perfectly safe for those inside, thanks to the Faraday cage effect, the external damage is a constant battle for maintenance crews. The lightning strikes are so frequent and powerful that they can actually pit the metal of the antenna, melting small holes into the steel. The heat of a lightning bolt is roughly 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. The fact that this building sustains dozens of these hits every year without structural failure is an engineering miracle, but it also means the building is in a constant state of being electrocuted. For the superstitious, this constant influx of high-voltage energy is what keeps the building's ghosts and shadows fueled and active. Because of its unique position, the Empire State Building became a literal laboratory for General Electric and other scientists in the mid-20th century. For years, cameras and measuring devices were rigged to the top of the tower to study the behavior of bolts. This data helped humans understand how to protect airplanes and power grids from lightning. But for the average person, the scary fact remains. When the clouds turn black over New York, the Empire State Building is the primary target. It is a lonely metal giant standing in a field of stone, constantly being whipped by the electric lashes of the sky. If you are ever at the top and feel the hair on your arms rise, or hear a faint buzzing coming from the walls, you aren't imagining things. You are part of the building's 100-strike annual ritual, a moment where the most famous building in the world becomes the most dangerous place on the planet. If you look at the very top of the Empire State Building, above the 102nd floor observation deck, you will see a slender, tapering spire that reaches for clouds. To most, it is simply an aesthetic crown or a base for television antennas. But the original insane purpose of this tower was far more terrifying. In the late 1920s, the developers believed that the future of transatlantic travel lay not in airplanes, but in massive, hydrogen-filled airships known as dirigibles or zeppelins. The spire was designed to be a docking station at 1,300 feet in the air, a plan so dangerous it bordered on suicidal. The vision was grand, cinematic, and utterly delusional. The idea was that massive airships like the Graf Zeppelin would approach Midtown Manhattan, hover over the building, and nose in to the spire. A winching cable would drop from the ship, be secured by workers on the building, and the airship would be pulled down until its nose was locked into a specialized gangplank. Once docked, passengers would exit the airship via a terrifying open-air walkway, step onto the 103rd floor, and take an elevator down to the street. In an era before strict aviation safety, this was marketed as the ultimate luxury, arriving in the heart of New York City without ever touching the ground. But the scary reality of the physics involved quickly turned this dream into a nightmare scenario that nearly caused catastrophe in the streets of New York. There were 2 major flaws with this plan, both of which were ignored in the rush to beat the Chrysler Building for the title of world's tallest. The first was the wind. At 1,300 feet, the thermal currents created by the heat of the city and the wind coming off the rivers create a canyon effect of unpredictable updrafts and crosswinds. Keeping a 700-foot-long airship, essentially a giant, fragile balloon, perfectly still while hovering over a skyscraper was an aerodynamic impossibility. The second flaw was the fuel. These airships were filled with millions of cubic feet of hydrogen, a gas that is notoriously flammable. The idea of bringing a giant, floating Hindenburg into the center of a densely populated metropolis, with thousands of people living and working directly beneath it, was a recipe for a localized Holocaust. Had an airship caught fire while docked at the Empire State Building, the resulting inferno would have poured molten metal and burning fabric down onto the crowds of 34th Street, likely causing more casualties than any disaster in New York's history. The developers actually attempted to prove the concept in September 1931. A small Navy dirigible, the USS Los Angeles, attempted to dock during a period of relatively calm winds. The results were terrifying. As the ship approached the spire, a sudden updraft caught the tail, flipping the massive craft nearly vertical. The crew fought desperately to regain control as the ship pitched wildly, its nose just feet away from smashing the Art Deco glass of the observation deck. A few weeks later, another attempt was made by a private blimp. It managed to hover long enough to drop a bundle of newspapers to the roof, but the wind was so violent that the ship was nearly dragged into the building's side. The pilot later described the experience as trying to tether a whale to a needle in a hurricane. After these harrowing near misses, the docking station idea was quietly and abruptly abandoned. The gangplank was never used by a single passenger, and the 103rd floor, which was meant to be the customs and arrivals lounge, became a cramped, private maintenance area that remains closed to the public today. Today, the 103rd floor is one of the most exclusive and scary spots in the building. It consists of a narrow circular balcony with a chest-high railing. Unlike the 86th floor, there is no heavy safety cage here. When you stand on this ledge, you are completely exposed to the elements at over 1,200 feet. It is a place of extreme vertigo, where the wind screams through the antenna rigging and the city below looks like a distant, silent dream. Urban legends persist that during the 1930s, a few adventurous, or perhaps foolish, maintenance workers actually walked out onto the docking arm just to see if they could withstand the wind. Some say that on especially foggy nights, you can still hear the phantom hum of a giant engine hovering just above the spire, the echo of a future that never arrived, or perhaps the ghost of a disaster that was narrowly avoided. The insane fact about the spire is that it was largely a marketing gimmick. It was added to the building's design at the last minute to ensure it would be taller than the Chrysler Building's hidden spire. The airship port story was the perfect cover for this ego-driven height race. The spire remains a symbol of a time when human ambition outpaced human understanding of safety. Every time a storm rolls in and the wind batters that tapering tower, it serves as a reminder of how close New York came to a Hindenburg moment in the middle of Manhattan. The spire wasn't built for science or for travel. It was built for pride, and the scary reality is that thousands of lives were nearly risked just to win a skyscraper war. In the long, tragic ledger of those who have sought to end their lives from the heights of the Empire State Building, there's one entry that defies every law of physics and probability. It is a story so insane that it sounds like a piece of urban folklore, yet it is a documented medical and historical fact. This is the story of Elvita Adams, the woman who jumped from the 86th floor and survived because the building, or perhaps the very air around it, refused to let her go. The date was December 2nd, 1979. Elvita Adams was a 29-year-old woman from the Bronx who was struggling through a period of profound personal despair. Reports from the Times suggest she had recently lost her job and was facing eviction, living on a meager welfare check that couldn't cover her needs. In a state of total hopelessness, she traveled to Midtown Manhattan and bought a ticket to the 86th floor observation deck. The 86th floor, as we have established, was already encased in a heavy iron suicide fence. However, Elvita was determined. She managed to find a gap or climb the ironwork with a desperate strength. On a Sunday evening, as the winter winds whipped around the Art Deco spire, Elvita Adams stepped off the ledge. She didn't just fall. She committed to a 1,050-foot plunge toward the concrete of 34th Street. At that height, gravity usually claims its prize in about 8 to 10 seconds. But the Empire State Building is not just a tall object. It is an aerodynamic obstacle. On this particular night, the wind was gusting at speeds between 30 and 60 miles per hour. As Elvita fell a powerful, Localized updraft, a literal wall of air forced upward by the building's flat limestone face, caught her body. Instead of continuing her downward trajectory to the street, Elvita was pushed inward, back toward the building's skeleton. She fell for only one story, roughly 20 feet, before being slammed onto a narrow, 2-foot-wide ledge on the 85th floor. The impact was violent, but it wasn't lethal. She landed on a setback, a part of the building's tier design that tourists below can barely see. For some time, Elvita lay on that cold, narrow ledge, hidden by the darkness and the howling wind, 1,000 feet above the ground. Inside the 85th floor, which was occupied by offices, a security guard named Frank Clark heard moaning coming from outside the window. In what must have been one of the most terrifying moments of his career, he peered through the glass to find a woman crumpled on the ledge, shivering in the winter cold. The rescue was a delicate, high-stakes operation. Emergency crews had to reach through the windows and pull her to safety. Elvita was transported to Bellevue Hospital with a fractured pelvis and a state of deep shock. She had cheated death by a margin of inches and a fluke of meteorology. The scary fact isn't just that she survived. It's the realization of what those few seconds must have felt like, to jump, expecting the end, and to be thrown back by the building itself. Scientists who study canyon winds in New York City explain that the Empire State Building acts as a massive sail. When high-speed winds hit the flat surface of the tower, they have nowhere to go but up and around. This creates high-pressure zones that can actually support weight for a split second. Elvita Adams happened to hit the exact sweet spot of an aerodynamic fluke. To the public, it was a miracle. To the building staff, it was a chilling reminder of the skyscraper's power. It showed that the building had its own internal atmosphere that could manipulate the fate of the people clinging to it. This event remains the only recorded instance of a person jumping from the observation deck and being returned to the building by the elements. Elvita Adams eventually recovered from her physical injuries. While she largely disappeared from the public eye after the incident, her story became a permanent part of the building's dark lore. It added a supernatural layer to the 86th floor. The idea that the building is alive and on rare occasions shows a strange kind of mercy. However, for many who visit the deck today, the story of Elvita Adams serves as a scary paradox. It highlights the sheer, terrifying scale of the structure. To be on a ledge on the 85th floor is still to be at a height that would kill almost any living thing. Her survival was a one-in-a-billion event, a moment where the empty state building decided it had seen enough tragedy for one night and pushed back against the darkness. It remains a haunting chapter in a book of stories where the ending is usually much, much grimmer. While many of the terrifying aspects of the Empire State Building are rooted in its tragic history, there's a physical phenomenon that occurs at its summit that borders on the supernatural. Because of the building's immense height and its isolation in the skyline, it interacts with the atmosphere in ways that no other structure does. This creates a scary environment where the very air becomes weaponized with electricity, leading to the legendary static kisses and electric screams of the spire. This isn't just about lightning strikes. It's about a constant, vibrating energy that makes the top of the building feel like a giant, buzzing heart. The Empire State Building is a massive conductor of static electricity. On days with low humidity or high winds, even without a cloud in the sky, the friction of the wind rubbing against the limestone and glass surfaces generates an enormous static charge. This charge accumulates at the highest points: the 86th floor deck, the 102nd floor gallery, and the lightning rod itself. In the mid-20th century, tourists began reporting a bizarre and unsettling sensation. As couples would reach out to hold hands or lean in for a kiss on the observation deck, a visible blue spark would jump between their lips or fingertips. These weren't just the tiny shocks you get from walking on a carpet. These were powerful discharges accompanied by a loud crack. This became known as the static kiss. While it started as a novelty, for many it was terrifying, a reminder that they were standing on a giant battery that was literally bleeding electricity into their bodies. More unsettling than the sparks is the sound. During certain atmospheric conditions, the metal rigging and thousands of feet of antenna wire at the top of the building begin to sing. As the air becomes heavily ionized, it produces a high-pitched, oscillating hum that can escalate into a sound resembling a human scream. This is caused by corona discharge, the same phenomenon that causes power lines to buzz, but amplified by the building's massive scale and the speed of the high-altitude winds. Security guards and maintenance workers who have to ascend to the 103rd floor or the base of the antenna have described the electric screams as the most haunting sound in New York. It sounds like the building is in pain, one worker noted in a 1970s interview. It's a vibration you don't just hear. You feel in your teeth and your bones. For those unaware of the science, these screams are often mistaken for the ghosts of the Sky Boys or the victims of the many tragedies that have occurred on the site. The most insane and scary reality of this electrical buildup is what it does to the human body. There are dozens of documented accounts of tourists on the 86th floor suddenly finding their hair standing perfectly on end, reaching toward the sky as if pulled by invisible strings. In the world of high-altitude safety, this is the ultimate red alert. It means the air is so saturated with electricity that a lightning strike is imminent, or that the person themselves has become a localized lightning rod. The building's management has had to install sophisticated sensors to monitor this buildup. When the buzzing becomes too loud or the static charge reaches dangerous levels, the observation decks are cleared immediately. The scary fact is that on a clear, sunny day, you could be standing on the deck, feeling a slight tingle in your skin, completely unaware that you are seconds away from being part of a massive electrical discharge. There is a specific story from the 1950s involving a technician working on the FM radio transmitters located near the top of the spire. Because of a sudden shift in the weather, the static buildup became so intense that when he reached for a metal railing, a spark nearly 4 inches long jumped from the steel to his forehead. The shock was so powerful it knocked him unconscious and left with temporary flash blindness. This event highlighted a terrifying reality. The Empire State Building is a weaponized environment. It is a place where the laws of the ground no longer apply. The static kisses are a charming name for a phenomenon that is actually the atmosphere trying to ground itself through human flesh. It reinforces the idea that the building is not just a passive object in the city. It is an active participant in the weather, a giant needle poking the belly of the sky and drawing out its energy. For paranormal enthusiasts, this constant electrical activity is the perfect explanation for the building's many hauntings. If a ghost is an echo of energy, there is no better place for that echo to be preserved than a 1,400-foot tall steel conductor that is constantly being recharged by the sun, the wind, and the lightning. The electric screams might be physics, but to those standing in the dark at 2 a.m., they sound like a choir of the building's past, powered by the very air that's around them. While the world gazes upward at the Empire State Building's shimmering spire, a darker, more claustrophobic world exists beneath the bustling sidewalks of 34th Street. The scary reality of the skyscraper isn't just about its height. It's about its depth. The building sits on a massive foundation of Manhattan schist, but carved into that rock is a labyrinth of basements, sub-basements, and lost levels that few humans have ever seen. This is where the building's true heart beats, and where the legends of a secret, subterranean world take root. To keep a city-sized building functional, it requires an astronomical amount of power. Deep in the bowels of the building, levels designated as B and C lie the massive electrical substations. These rooms are filled with giant, humming transformers and high-voltage switchgear that date back to the early 20th century. The air down here is heavy with the smell of old oil, ozone, and ancient dust. The scary fact about these basement levels is that they were designed during a time when safety was secondary to industrial power. The corridors are narrow, the ceilings are low, and the machinery emits a low-frequency hum that has been known to cause infrasound hallucinations. Engineering staff working these levels have reported an intense feeling of being watched, a phenomenon often attributed to the way high-voltage equipment affects the human nervous system. In the silence of the night, when the rest of New York is sleeping, these basement levels feel like the engine room of a ghost ship. For decades, rumors have circulated about a secret level E or level F that doesn't appear on any official blueprints. Urban explorers and former maintenance workers have whispered about tunnels that lead directly from the Empire State Building's basement to New York City subway system, or even to secret train platforms. The most persistent legend involves a private track connected to Penn Station, intended for use by high-profile tenants or as an escape route during the Cold War. While no definitive proof of a luxury train platform has surfaced, The building does have deep-level access to the city's massive steam and utility tunnels. These tunnels are dark, wet, and incredibly dangerous, a place where the steam pressure is high enough to melt human flesh in seconds if a pipe were to burst. This hidden world beneath the skyscraper is a mirror image of the spire. While the top is open and airy, the bottom is a crushing, pressurized tomb of 1930s technology. One of the most insane physical objects hidden in the basement is a massive multi-ton vault. During the early days of the building, it was rumored that the basement would house the most secure bank vault in the world. The vault doors were so heavy and the construction so deep that it was said they could withstand a nuclear blast. However, the bank that was supposed to occupy the space never moved in, leaving the massive steel structure abandoned in the dark. For years, the forgotten vault became a dumping ground for the building's relics. It sits there today, a silent, impenetrable box of steel buried under millions of tons of limestone. There is something inherently scary about a vault that has been sealed for decades, containing the discarded remnants of a century of history. It is a literal time capsule of the building's darkest secrets, locked away where the sun never reaches. Because Manhattan is an island, the deepest levels of the Empire State Building are constantly battling the intrusion of groundwater. The building has a sophisticated system of sump pumps that run 24/7 to prevent the sub-basements from flooding. If the power were to fail completely, the lowest levels would be underwater within hours. Workers have had to descend into sump pits to perform repairs describe a terrifying environment. The pipes that carry water and steam to the building's veins often groan and shriek under pressure. In the pitch black of a sub-basement, these sounds are easily mistaken for human voices or footsteps in the water. The scary reality is that the building is in a constant state of war with the earth itself. The foundation isn't just sitting on the rock. It is fighting the water and the pressure of the island, a battle that happens in total darkness, hundreds of feet below the tourists taking selfies on the observation deck. The basements of the Empire State Building serve as a reminder that every great achievement has a hidden cost. For every foot the building reaches toward the light, there is a corresponding depth of darkness and industrial grit. The men who work in the sub-basements are the forgotten workers of the icon, navigating a world of high-voltage death and subterranean isolation. When you walk through the gleaming marble lobby, remember that just a few dozen feet beneath your shoes is a world of shadows, forgotten vaults, and the pressurized secrets of a century. The Empire State Building is a vertical city, and like any city, its most frightening stories are often buried in the basement. While the history of the Empire State Building is often associated with the distant past, the Great Depression, the 1940s bomber crash, and vintage tragedies, one of its most terrifying and insane events occurred in the modern era. On February 23, 1997, the 86th floor observation deck, a place of joy and wonder for millions, was transformed into a site of modern-day carnage. This event was a chilling reminder that the building's iconic status makes it a magnet not just for dreamers, but for the deeply disturbed. It was a day when the world's most famous observatory became a high-altitude crime scene. The perpetrator was Abu Kamal, a 69-year-old former teacher who had traveled to New York from Florida. He was a man consumed by bitterness and political rage, carrying a resentment that he decided to take to the highest point in the city. On that cold Sunday afternoon, Kamal did something that would be nearly impossible in today's world of post-9/11 security. He walked into the Empire State Building with a .38 caliber Beretta semi-automatic handgun hidden under his coat. At the time, security at the building was significantly more relaxed. There were no metal detectors at the entrance, and the focus of the staff was on crowd control rather than counterterrorism. Kamal rode the elevators up to the 86th floor, blending in with the hundreds of tourists who had come to see the panoramic views of Manhattan. He stepped out onto the outdoor deck, moved among the families and couples, and waited for his moment. At approximately 5 p.m., as the sun was beginning to set over the Hudson River, the peace of the observation deck was shattered. Without warning, Kamal pulled out his handgun and began firing into the crowd. He wasn't targeting anyone specific. He was firing at the very idea of the people around him. The scene was one of pure, unadulterated chaos. On a narrow deck 1,050 feet in the air, there is nowhere to run. People dove behind the heavy coin-operated binoculars, huddled against the limestone walls, and screamed in terror as the sound of gunfire echoed off the Art Deco masonry. For 7 minutes, the observation deck was a killing box. Kamal fired a total of 10 rounds, striking 7 people. One of his victims, a 27-year-old Danish musician named Chris Barker, was killed instantly while enjoying a view with his bandmates. After the initial burst of violence, Kamal turned the gun on himself. As security guards and panicked tourists scrambled for cover, the sound of a final shot rang out. Kamal fell to ground, dead by his own hand, ending the immediate threat, but leaving behind a trauma that would change the building forever. The scary reality of a 1997 shooting was a vulnerability it exposed. For nearly 70 years, the Empire State Building had been seen as a sanctuary, a place where you were above it all. The shooting proved that the violence of the world below could follow you to the clouds. The image of blood on the stone floor of the 86th floor observatory, a place synonymous with romantic proposals and cinematic moments, was a jarring contrast that horrified the world. Following the shooting, the Empire State Building underwent a radical transformation in its security protocols. This event was a catalyst of metal detectors, X-ray machines, and the intense police presence that visitors experience today. It was the moment the building lost its innocence. The management realized that being an icon meant being a target. But for those who were there that day, the scars are not physical. Witnesses spoke of the haunting silence that followed the gunfire, broken only by the whistling wind and the sound of sirens rising from the streets below. The shooting added a new, modern layer to the building's ghost stories. Some staff members claim that on quiet evenings, the 86th floor feels heavy, as if the echoes of that frantic 7 minutes are still vibrating in the air. The 1997 shooting is a dark milestone in the building's timeline. It reminds us that insane facts aren't always about physics or accidents. Sometimes they are about the darkness of the human mind. The Empire State Building has seen fire, it has seen planes fall from the sky, and it has seen people leap into the abyss. But on that day in February, it saw a different kind of darkness, one that arrived in an elevator and chose a place of beauty for an act of hate. Today, as you pass through the security checkpoints at the base of the building, you are participating in a system created because of Abu Kamal. The safety of the modern tourist is built on the tragedy of 1997. It is a scary, sobering thought that even at 1,000 feet, we are never truly separated from the realities of the world we left behind on the sidewalk. If you look at photographs of the Empire State Building from the early 1930s, the observation deck looks strikingly different. Back then, it was an open-air promenade with a relatively low, elegant railing that allowed for an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the horizon. Today, however, that same deck is encased in a massive, curved steel fence that arches inward like the bars of a high-altitude prison. This is not a decorative feature. It is a suicide fence, a physical manifestation of the building's darkest struggle and a permanent reminder of the lives lost to the siren call the abyss. From the moment it opened in 1931, the Empire State Building became a victim of its own grandeur. Its height was unparalleled, and its status as the top of the world made it a symbolic destination for those who felt they had reached the end of their rope. The scary fact is that in the first decade of its existence, the building witnessed an alarming number of leapers. The open-air design of the 86th floor made it tragically easy for someone to step over the railing in a moment of impulse or planned despair. By 1947, the situation had reached a breaking point. The tragic and high-profile death of Evelyn McHale, which we covered in Part 4, was a catalyst that forced the building's management to acknowledge a terrifying reality. Their masterpiece had become the world's most famous platform for self-destruction. In a single 3-week span following McHale's death, 5 people attempted to jump. The building was under siege by tragedy. The decision to install the fence was not made lightly. Architects argued that it would ruin the aesthetic of the Art Deco masterpiece, while others felt it was a necessary moral intervention. In late 1947, the construction began on a heavy, diamond-patterned steel mesh fence. The design was specific. It didn't just go up, it curved sharply inward at the top. This was to prevent anyone from gaining enough leverage to climb over and drop down. When the fence was completed, the atmosphere of the 86th floor changed overnight. What was once a place of infinite freedom became a caged environment for the staff The fence was a relief, but for the public, it was a sobering visual cue. It was a silent admission by the city of New York that the building was too dangerous to be left open. The fence is insane because it represents a battle between architectural beauty and human frailty, a battle that beauty ultimately lost. Despite the installation of the suicide fence, the scary reality is that it didn't stop everyone. Over the decades, determined individuals have found ways to circumvent the barrier. Some have used the building's own maintenance equipment, while others have found small gaps or climbed the outer structure during construction or repair periods. The fence also created a new kind of macabre hobby. In the late 20th century, base jumpers, those who parachute from buildings, antennas, spans, and earth, began to target the Empire State Building. In 1986, 2 men had parachutes under their coats, jumped from the deck, and successfully landed on the streets below before disappearing into the crowd. While they survived, their actions highlighted that the fence was not just about suicide. It was a barrier against insane risks people were willing to take for a moment of high-altitude adrenaline. Psychologists have often commented on the claustrophobia of the heights that the fence creates. When you stand on the 86th floor today, you're looking at one of the most beautiful views in the world through a literal cage. It creates a psychological barrier that reminds every visitor of the darkness. You cannot look at the view without seeing the steel bars, and you cannot see the bars without wondering why they are there. The fence has its own ghostly lore. Security guards have reported seeing hands gripping the mesh from the outside, a physical impossibility at 1,000 feet. Others have noted that on windy nights, the fence sings or whistles in a way that sounds like distant, overlapping voices. It is as if the fence itself has absorbed the energy of the thousands of people who have stood there, contemplating the drop. It is a filter that catches the heavy emotions of the visitors, holding them in the steel mesh for decades. Today, the fence is such a part of the building's silhouette that most people don't even question its existence. It is maintained with the same care as the limestone walls and the gold leaf lobby. But for the historian or the truth seeker, the fence is a grim monument. It is a scary proof that the Empire State Building is a place of intense polarities, a place of peak human achievement, and a place of deep human sorrow. The fence remains the building's iron mask. It protects the people from the building and the building from its own reputation. Every time you see a tourist posing for a photo against those curved bars, remember that you are looking at a safety feature born from a wave of blood and despair. It is a suicide fence, and it is the only thing standing between the beauty of the New York skyline and the terrifying physics of a 1,000-foot fall. The Empire State Building is a vertical labyrinth of 73 elevators, moving thousands of people daily through nearly 7 miles of vertical shafts. To the average tourist, these elevators are mere transit boxes, fast, efficient, and slightly ear-popping. But to the engineers, elevator mechanics, and night shift security who spend their lives in the interstitial spaces, the gaps between the walls, the elevator shafts are the most haunted corridors in Manhattan. This is where the echoes and the steel reside. It is a scary and insane reality that in the dead of night, these shafts become massive acoustic chambers for sounds that have no logical origin. An elevator shaft is, by design, a perfect resonance chamber. It is a long, narrow tube of steel and concrete that stretches from the dark sub-basement to the very top of the spire. Because of the building's height, these shafts act like giant organ pipes. The wind rushing over the top of the building creates standing waves of sound that travel down the shafts, creating low-frequency vibrations that the human ear often perceives as voices humming or distant weeping. However, the scary fact is that many of these sounds are too specific to be dismissed as mere wind. Mechanics working on the guide rails in the middle of the night, often suspended in a small work car in the pitch black, have reported hearing the distinct sound of a woman's laughter echoing from 3 floors above. When they move the car to investigate, the sound moves as if it is receding further into the darkness of the shaft. These are not just noises. They are acoustic ghosts, remnant of a century of human emotion trapped in a steel vacuum. Among the building staff, shaft number 6 has a particularly dark reputation. This was the site of the Betty Lou Oliver freefall, covered in Part 3, and several other less publicized accidents over the decades. Modern elevator technicians, who are often highly logical and technically minded, have shared insane stories about this specific shaft. Reports include the sensation of ghostly resistance, a feeling that the elevator car is heavier than it should be, as if someone is standing on the roof of the cab. More terrifying are the intercom incidents. Security guards in the lobby have reported receiving calls from the emergency intercom inside a car that is currently empty and parked on a high floor. When they answer, they don't hear a voice asking for help. They hear the rushing sound of wind and the faint, rhythmic metallic clinking of what sounds like 1930s era construction tools. It is as if the Sky Boys are still at work in the shafts long after the shift have ended. Science offers a scary but rational explanation for some of these hauntings. Infrasound. These are sound waves with frequency lower than 20 hertz, which is below the threshold of human hearing. However, even if you can't hear infrasound, your body feels it. Low-frequency vibrations caused by the wind hitting a building as massive as the Empire State can cause the fluid in the human eye to vibrate, creating gray ghosts in the peripheral vision. It can also trigger a sense of a presence or a feeling of extreme dread. The insane part is that the Empire State Building is a giant infrasound generator. The way the wind interacts with the Art Deco setbacks creates a constant, silent vibration that can make a person feel like they are being hunted. For a worker alone in an elevator shaft at 3 a.m., the science doesn't matter. The fear is real. The building is literally vibrating with a frequency that is designed by nature to trigger the fight or flight response in humans. There's a recurring urban legend among the building's elevator operators about the passenger from the 80th floor. The story goes that occasionally an operator, back when they were still manual, would stop at the 80th floor, the site of the 1945 bomber crash, to pick up a lone passenger. The passenger, usually described as looking disheveled or burnt, would enter the car, but by the time the elevator reached the lobby, the car would be empty. While modern elevators are automated, the legend has persisted. Today's security cameras occasionally glitch on the 80th floor landing, showing a flickering humanoid shape waiting for doors that never open. The shaft are the arteries of the building, and many believe that the blood, the life force, of the building's tragic history is still flowing through them. The steel cables and girders have memory, and the elevator shaft is the place where that memory is most vocal. To be inside an elevator shaft in the Empire State Building is to be inside the chest cavity of a giant. You hear the groan of the steel, the whistle of the wind, and the echoes of a million past journeys. It is a place of immense power and profound isolation. The scary truth is that while we think we are alone in the elevator, we are surrounded by the resonance of everyone who has ever traveled that path before us. The elevator shafts are not just for transportation. They are the building's memory banks, echoing with the screams of the 1945 crash, the laughter of 1930s workers, and the silent, vibrating dread of the heights. When the doors slide shut and the car begins to rise, listen closely. You might just hear the building talking back to you. While millions of people have stood on the 86th floor observation deck, far fewer have ascended to the 102nd floor. For decades, this level was a forgotten observatory, a cramped, circular room that felt more like a lighthouse gallery than a tourist attraction. But there is something insane and deeply scary about the 102nd floor that sets apart from the rest of the building. This is a vertigo room, a place where the architectural geometry and the extreme height conspire to play tricks on the human brain, making it one of the most psychologically taxing spots in New York City. To reach the 102nd floor, you must leave the main elevators and enter a smaller, specialized top-deck elevator. As you ascend the final 16 stories, the building narrows significantly. By the time you step out onto the 102nd floor, you're no longer in a massive skyscraper. You are inside a glass-walled cylinder only 25 feet in diameter. The scary reality of this floor is the lack of a buffer. On the 86th floor, there's a wide stone promenade between you and the edge. On the 102nd floor, there's only a sheet of high-strength glass between your face and a 1,224-foot drop. Because the room is so small and circular, your brain loses its sense of horizontal reference. This leads to a phenomenon known as high place phenomenon, or the call of the void, where the sheer verticality of the view creates a momentary, terrifying impulse to lean into the glass. One of the most insane facts about the Empire State Building is that it is designed to move. Like all skyscrapers, it must be flexible to survive high winds. In a severe storm, the 102nd floor can sway several inches from the center. While this is an engineering triumph, Being inside the 102nd floor gallery during a windstorm is a nightmare for the senses. Visitors have reported seeing the water in the toilets or the coffee in their cups ripple and tilt without anyone touching them. You can hear the building creak, a deep metallic groan of 60,000 tons of steel stretching and compressing. On the 102nd floor, you aren't just looking at the weather, you are riding it. The sensation of being in a moving, glass-walled birdcage 102 stories in the air is enough to trigger a panic attack in even the most seasoned traveler. This is a scary truth of the heights. The building is not a static object. It is a living, breathing, swaying entity. As mentioned in Part 7, the levels just above the 102nd floor were originally designed as a customs and arrivals area for transatlantic dirigibles. Because that plan failed, the area became a dead zone. For years, the 102nd floor was poorly lit and rarely visited, leading to its reputation as the loneliest spot in the sky. Maintenance workers who had to stay on the 102nd floor after hours to clean the windows or check the electrical systems reported a strange, thin atmosphere. At that altitude, the air is slightly thinner and the isolation is absolute. One former employee described the feeling as being on the moon while looking at the Earth. The scary part of the 102nd floor isn't ghosts. It's a psychological way to being so high up that you feel disconnected from the human race. The cars below look like ants, and the people are invisible. It is a place of profound, terrifying perspective. If the 86th floor is a lightning rod, the 102nd floor is a bullseye. Because the 102nd floor is directly beneath the antenna spire, it is often the point of highest electrical tension during a storm. During the mid-20th century, before the windows were upgraded to modern standards, the glass would sometimes vibrate with sympathetic resonance during a lightning strike. Imagine being in a tiny, circular room when a bolt of 300 million volts hits the spire just 200 feet above your head. The flash is so bright it penetrates the walls, and the sound is not a boom but a shatter. The 102nd floor is a front row seat to the violence of nature, a place where the scary power of the atmosphere is separated from you by only a few inches of material. It is the most exposed room in the city, a glass bubble perched on the edge of the heavens. Architects call the 102nd floor a crown, but for those with acrophobia, it is a trap. The circular design means that no matter which way you turn, the drop is right there. There is no back of the room to retreat to. This forced confrontation with the height is what makes the 102nd floor so insane. It serves as the final vertical boundary of the public's reach. Beyond this floor lies only the maintenance ladders, the stealth 103rd floor balcony, and the antenna. The 102nd floor is a transition point between the world of men and the world of the sky. It is a room of vertigo, of swaying steel, and of an isolation so deep it feels like the building itself is trying to push you off the planet. We have journeyed from the bloody foundations of the 1930s sky boys to the electric screams of the modern spire. We have explored the most beautiful suicide, the miracle survival of a 75-story freefall, the fire of AB-25 bomber, and the cage reality of the 86th floor. Now, we must ask the final, most insane question. Why does the Empire State Building continue to haunt our collective imagination? The answer lies in its legacy, a complex tapestry of human ambition, cold stone, and the persistent shadows of those who never left. The Empire State Building is more than just an office building or a tourist trap. It is a 365,000-ton monument to the idea that humans can conquer the sky. But as we have seen through these 15 parts, every foot of progress was bought with a price. The scary reality is that the building is a vertical graveyard of dreams. It was born in the middle of the Great Depression, a time of national despair, and it served as a beacon of hope. But that hope was built on the backs of men who worked without harnesses and died in the shadows of the limestone. The building's legacy is one of polarized energy. On one hand, it represents the peak of Art Deco elegance and American industrial might. On the other, it is a magnet for the brokenhearted and the desperate. This duality creates a unique charge that people feel the moment they step into the marble lobby. You aren't just entering a building. You are entering a historical pressure cooker where the triumphs and tragedies of a century have been compressed into 102 floors of steel and stone. One of the most insane aspects of the building's legacy is the idea that it is, in some ways, alive. From the way it sways in the wind to the way it breathes through its ventilation shafts and screams with static electricity, the Empire State Building behaves more like a biological organism than a static structure. To the maintenance crews who have spent decades in its veins, the building has a personality. It can be temperamental, it can be protective, and on rare occasions, like the case of Elvita Adams, it can be merciful. The ghosts we discussed, the red ghost, the echoes in the steel, the sky boys, are a part of this living architecture, whether they're literal spirits or stone tape, recordings of intense emotional events. They are woven into the very fabric of the building. The legacy of the Empire State Building is that it refuses to forget. Every tragedy that has occurred within its walls has left a permanent scent, a lingering vibration that contributes to the building's dark and heavy atmosphere. For nearly a century, the Empire State Building was the tallest sentinel in the New York skyline. Even now, as taller, sleeker towers of glass rise around it, the limestone giant remains the soul of the city. It has survived world wars, economic collapses, plane crashes, and the changing tide of history. But its survival has come at the cost of its innocence. It is a scary sentinel because it has seen everything. It has watched the city evolve, and it has absorbed the collective energy of millions of people who have gazed up at it with either awe or agony. The insane fact is that if the building were to be torn down tomorrow, the hole it would leave in the atmosphere will be more than just physical. The energy of the site is so deeply entrenched in the identity of New York that the ground itself would likely remain charged for centuries. It is a landmark of the human spirit, in all its glory and all its horror. As you look at the Empire State Building today, shimmering under its multicolored LED lights, remember the darkness we have uncovered. Remember that the world's most famous building is also one of its most haunted. Every rivet was driven by a man who risked it all. Every floor has a story of a life that was changed or ended within its walls. The scary fact about the Empire State Building aren't just trivia. They are the shadows that give the light of the building its depth. It is a masterpiece of light and shadow, height and depth, miracle and tragedy. It is cathedral of the skies, but it is also a tower of shadows. And as long as it stands, it will continue to pull at the heartstrings of the world, inviting us to look up while silently reminding us of the terrible price of reaching too high. Conclusion: the Empire State Building remains the ultimate paradox of architecture. It is a beautiful Art Deco crown that hides a history of fire, blood, and electricity. It is a symbol of New York's resilience, but it is also a record of its most private despairs. As you leave the 86th floor and descend back to the world of the living on the sidewalk below, you carry a piece of that insane history with you. The building doesn't just watch over the city. It haunts it,